resume course, resume doctor kind of sessions. So you can, when you need to move your career or change your job, and you will be better prepared. So see if you can take advantage of any of those resources that we provide here or over in Stillwater. Especially, I strongly recommend you to participate in the Stillwater Business Career Fair because, well, I guess the companies have to pay to attend and present their company in the career fair. So they choose not to attend both, but rather go to Stillwater because they have more students. Go to bigger pond to catch more fish. So even if the company is based in Tulsa, they don't come here in our Stillwater. Not all of them, but some of them decide not to attend the Tulsa Career Fair. So I strongly recommend you to go to the business fair on 19th, and you don't even need to worry about driving there. You can take the big orange bus, Bob. If you haven't tried that, it's pretty comfortable. I ride it very often. And you can use free Wi-Fi in the bus, and it's free for that day. So you just need to register. All the links and resources are on that web page. I'm gonna link to the URL. And if you upload anything that shows that you took advantage of any of those resources, this Dropbox career event participation, then you will get an extra point. It has to be done before October 3rd. Any question regarding this? Another thing I need to mention is, so the quizzes are kind of your study guide because there are so many topics. You don't. There's nothing wrong with that, but you usually don't want to read through those textbooks, hundreds of pages of textbooks first. Rather, you just go through the slides and the quiz, and then go back to the textbook and just find those concepts and terms that you are not sure about as you go through these quizzes. So there are 3 currently open quizzes. 2 are new, and I noticed that I activated wrong quiz last week. That was on the network layer topics. A couple of students tried it, didn't do it very well because network layer needs some extra explanation. So you're not there yet, don't worry about them. Sorry if you tried and frustrated. But go try these 2 new ones. If we haven't done this physical layer yet, try that again. And that will help you prepare for the first exam, which was scheduled on the 20th, but we'll just do a regular class on 20th. And then I'm gonna make it a take-home exam. So you can just have a few days of window whenever you want to start. You can start and have to finish in a certain time, like 30 minutes or 1 hour, depending on how many questions I decide to put. And if you are well prepared with the quiz, then you don't have to worry about the exam. The exam questions will all come from these quizzes. So we left here. sometimes my PowerPoint doesn't want to cooperate. I'm not clicking.
Windows 10 seems to hang like that.
It never happens if I'm just using it in my office or at home, but only when I connect this to here.
Which PowerPoint is this?
The second slide there for physical layer.
6 through 7.
Yeah. So we know that the fiber optic cables have different specifications, and you have to choose the right one for your device. And I mentioned that there's a thing called transceiver. These are optical transceivers in different form factors. The older ones tend to be bigger. And you see this heat sink because it created a significant amount of heat. But today's devices usually have this small form factor transceivers. And as the name suggests, it transmits and receives optical signals. So it's like a little flashlight with very good component, very bright laser or laser quality LED lights, and also it receives. So it has two ports usually. It has two holes. One is to generate light signals and send it out, and then the other one sends the light coming in. And usually when you buy a switch or router that supports fiber optic cable connections, they usually have a big hole covered with rubber lid, and you actually have to order these extra transceivers depending on how many you want, and just slide it in. It's easy, just plug in and then plug out. It's totally off and then pick up, and then you can plug the fiber optic cables into the transceivers. And depending on what transceiver you use, you have to pick the right connector shape as well. Yeah. Bunch of connector shapes, all different. And this is an example of the transceiver that we use downstairs. SFP Plus module is pretty popular, and ours is for short distance applications within the data center. So we use this 850 nanometer fiber optic cable that supports 10 gigabit speed. So SR here, so in the beginning you have 10G base SR. So S here stands for short range. Some applications use multiplexing. We learned multiplexing, right? Wavelength division multiplexing. Not for the regular Ethernet, but between the switching offices, you may want to combine multiple digital signals and send them over a single fiber line. In that case, you modulate them into different wavelengths or different colors of the light to better utilize the trunk lines. These are all good size of fiber optic cables. Why we prefer to use fiber optic cables rather than copper? First, this is light. Okay? Light and cheaper these days. Copper is one of the most expensive metal. So you may have heard that someone stole your AC exterior unit because it has a chunk of copper inside. fiber optic cable was hard to produce in the early days, so that was the reason that was more expensive. But these days it's just commodity, so it's getting cheaper and cheaper, especially for long haul. It's easy to work with. You don't have to carry the heavy cable around. Although it's a little bit at this point, it's much harder to splice or make a terminate the cable. Low attenuation. So compared to the electromagnetic signals that travel the copper conductor medium, the light signals going through the fiber optic cable of today's quality can go much farther without regenerating and cleaning up the signal. So it's very good for long distance communication. And immune to environmental interference. Environmental interference here mainly refers to the electric or magnetic interference, which is pretty common, right? So you don't have to worry about thunderstorms or strong magnetic fields generated by many electronics, microwave and things like that. If you use fiber optic cables, but still it's a little more susceptible to physical stress. When you bend it or shake it too much. Pardon?
I just really, that's interesting.
Well, but today's cable has some reinforcement. So it has some, usually if you have thick fiber optic bundles going under the ocean or under the ground, then you usually have many layers of insulation and also a metal cable, so you don't, even if you pull it really hard, the metal part will enforce and keep the fiber optic cables from breaking. And it's more secure, not because the signal is anything special, different from the electric signals, but because it's hard to tap. It's not conductor. We cannot just tap it and listen. You have to break it, and when you break, people notice that there was a breakage, and until you put it back, and which is hard, right? Make a termination at the end of the cable is hard, and connect them back to the eavesdropping device is harder, so it's more secure. Disadvantage, more expensive? Not really these days. And if you are going over 10 Gbps, then probably it will be cheaper to go with fiber than getting the copper conductor, which requires the highest quality that we have in the market. Installation is higher skill and tools that are not very common. So the clamping tool for the Cat5 cable is dirt cheap, $10 or even less. But I believe OSU Tulsa and I think OSU still don't have the capability to terminate a fiber optic cable and produce a good connection. So you have to buy it from outside. I talked about the vibration and physical damage. And the difficulty of adding node is because of the difficulty of the termination of the cable. But these days, fiber is widely used within a data center, so between switches and the servers, high capacity servers. But the last mile for the end user computers like this still use copper, so you can still reuse the previous cabling. This table just compares the different medium. And any questions so far in terms of the conductor medium or guided medium? Then let's move on to the unguided or wireless transmission. So wireless transmission can be divided into three groups based on the frequency of the signals. So radio, microwave, infrared. as I said, they are all radio. But depending on kind of generation, first generation we just call them radio, the second generation we call them microwave because they have shorter wavelengths than the older radio signals. And then infrared, which is not part of electromagnetic signal, but it's more like a light signal. So here, so the same light signal can be used through guided medium, which is fiber optic cable, or you can just shoot it through the air or through the space. In that case, we call it infrared. So they have different range of frequencies, and because of that different range of frequencies, we have to use different kind of approach and technique to get the most juice out of them. Okay? So if the frequency of electric signal is low, they are easy to bend. They travel through the air, hit something, and then they bend. As the frequency goes higher, they kind of bounce back. And also there's a special layer in the atmosphere of the Earth, and that's what we call ionosphere. And that special layer that is charged with electrons. So when electromagnetic signal hit that layer, it acts like a wall. And in lower frequency range, they bend around and travel along the surface of the Earth, whereas the microwave range signals go straight rather than bend along the curvature of the Earth and hit the ionosphere, and it bounces back. Okay? When it goes really high, higher range of microwave, if you shoot them upward toward the ionosphere, they will just break through that layer and escape, and they never come back. So you have to shoot it directly to the receiver. So you need a line of sight transceivers. This table shows the different frequency range that we have used in the old applications, like the radio and TV and CB radio, which are all pretty old. Then satellite use the microwave range. If you remember, in all 5-10 years ago, there was a bunch of products that kind of extend the Wi-Fi range using wall adapter. You just plug that into the power outlet on the wall, and that kind of carry the Wi-Fi signal downstairs or upstairs and regenerate the signal in a different room. In which case they were using actually power line, the regular power utility, 110 or 120 volt utility lines, because that also has frequency like a 55, 60 hertz of the frequency. And then we have radio and microwave. So we have all the AM, FM, and TV service around here. And then from the microwave, you have satellite communication, infrared. It's a direct communication between your devices, handheld devices. And you have visible light. And that part we use optical fiber. But these days, some organizations like NASA experiments the use of or application of laser communication, not through the fiber optic cable, but just shoot the laser through the air or through the space between their fancy stuff that flies in the air, in the sky, or in the space, like between planet communication and things like that. So, as I said, depending on the frequency of the radio, you have to adopt different strategies to utilize the characteristics of those radio signals. So the lower frequency range that where the signal will bend around and can find the receiver wherever it is. Even if your antenna is, receiving antenna is behind the wall, it will just bend around it and deliver the signal. You can use omnidirectional antenna, which is just a stick that come on all this antenna that has a stick. So if you use those kind of antenna, the signal will just spread around 360 degrees. You cannot really control where the signal goes. Whereas microwaves has very strong directionality. So you use either dish or horn antenna. That way you can choose where to send the signal and where to focus to receive the signals. That's why most communication center connecting the satellite use dish antenna. You have dish for your the video TV service, right? Direct, what's the name? Direct TV. Direct TV. But how about your Wi-Fi? You have Wi-Fi access point at home, right? Most of you have one of those. What kind of antenna do you have there? Omnidirectional. You have sticks, right? Some have 1, some have 2, some have 4, some have 6. How many of you have 6 antennas on your AP access point? 1. Nice. I want to have one of those. So newer ones and more expensive ones tend to have more antennas. You cannot just have 12 antennas because they are not supported. But there's a reason. The thing is, when you have the sticks, the omnidirectional antenna sticking out of your AP, you cannot control the direction of your signals. So no matter where you are inside of your house, the signal length, the signal strength will depend on the distance between you and the access point, and maybe the number of walls between you and the access point. But the newer Wi-Fi standards that we will cover later in a data link layer section. So before I mention that, so Wi-Fi signals use this microwave range. So you're kind of wasting the signal power because you cannot really direct them when they have strong directionality. But newer Wi-Fi has multiple antennas. Now, you're not talking about the 802.11 A, B, G, but from N and up, the different antennas use the characteristics of electrons. In electrons, you have plus and minus, right? It's like a man and woman. Man and man, they kind of play, but they don't really like, right? Plus and minus go together. Plus, plus, push up. Minus, minus, push up. So when you can control the transmission of signals at the bit level, let's say this is an access point, and you have 3 antennas sticking out. And if you look at that from the top, it can be like this, right? You bend it over like this, and you bend the side ones to outward. Then if this signal transmits a plus charge, this one plus, this one minus, what would happen? They don't like, so they push each other, but they like, they pull, right? So the signal spread at that moment will be wide this side and compact this side, right? So if you are here or here, then you can have strong enough signal that you can communicate with the access point. If you are here, although the distance is the same to the access point, you are out of luck. You don't have good signal. So if your access point can sense where your current users are, okay, then it can adjust these plus and minuses to shape the signal to give the best, strongest power to the current users. Right? That's a signal shaping technique. So today's Wi-Fi provide that kind of support, and also the mobile internet or mobile network for your cell phones also use that technique. So there can be hundreds of different users, cell phone users within a single cell, but only 10 of them, for example, actually use the phone at any given moment. Then the antenna will sense where the signal is coming from, because they usually have at least three antennas. You can measure the timing of the signal coming at the different antennas and triangulate the source of the communication user and form this signal to provide the strongest signal power to the current user, the one who is using the cell phone service at the moment. And that's because we are using directional microwave range frequency. Or you can just create one, you can take advantage of the directionality. So that's what we call Pringles antenna. And that kind of shapes the signal in the form of like a cannon. So you send all the signals into a single direction, just like dish antenna or horn antenna, to pass your Wi-Fi signal to certain receiver. And actually that was, I don't see them anymore, but that was created and pretty popular like about 10 years ago when people tried to hack into someone else's device, someone else's access point. You point that to some of your friend's window and send some ill-formed packets that can crash the device in your friend's house. That was pretty popular, so if you just go to eBay, well, back then Amazon was not that popular, so eBay was bigger, and you could easily buy them from eBay. Any question regarding physical layer? So there are many interesting things in physical layer, but for you guys, most of you probably will not make use of those details in physical layer in your career. If your plan is a typical MIS graduate plan. I want you to guys move up to the upper layers beyond the layer 3. Data link layer is still pretty low. So low doesn't mean that it's not useful, but low means it's infrastructure, it's there. You assume that it's all there and provide service. And really doesn't matter what kind of infrastructure you use, internet will work. So data link layer is layer 2. And we'll talk about different data link layer protocols, technology, and devices. And also we'll talk about addressing, and we'll learn what ARP is. ARP stands for Address Resolution Protocol. Okay? And indeed, in this book, and I usually treat ARP as a layer 3 protocol. Because layer 1 and layer 2 is the basics that you must have to have a single network. ARP, you don't really need. You don't need ARP to have a single network. Your device can work pretty all right without ARP and communicate with each other. But the thing is, you have to have an ARP if you want to use the internet. So if you remember, there are different types of addresses in different layers, right? In data link layer, what kind of address do you use? MAC address, yes. How about in the network layer? IP. And which one do you need to actually deliver a frame? Signal is like a electric form of or light form of frames, right? Frames go back and forth between sender and the receiver, and you have to use certain address. They are in the header. Is that MAC address or IP address? MAC address, right? You cannot use IP address for actual delivery of any of your frames. But your applications don't really care what MAC address your communication partner has. It's low level. They don't really care. But every internet application uses IP address to appoint the communication partner, right? So someone has to resolve the IP address into the MAC address, and that's ARP. Right? So it's somewhere between layer 2 and layer 3. So you can use IP address to find out MAC address and use the MAC address to deliver your communication message. But since we already covered data link layer here, we'll talk about ARP in this chapter. But remember, ARP is considered, in most references, ARP is considered layer 3 protocol. And within the data link layer, you have 2 different sub-layers, and they have different functions. We'll talk about that. And then for different technology, different infrastructure, they use different approach to share a medium with multiple devices. So cell phones, if we are using cell phones, we use the air as a medium. And we use the copper conductor cable for Ethernet. So how do we make your devices, multiple devices, compete or share the single medium to avoid problems and succeed the transmission? So the service by data link layer, what kind of service do data link layer modules provide? The physical layer is actually transmitting the signals and receiving the signals. The data link layer provide the message itself, the final message piece that will be transformed to signals. And that's for a single network delivery. So if we have multiple networks, each network has its own data link layer service going on, and all the delivery from one device to another, whether that device is a computer or a router, they are served by data link layer modules. If the message has to go to a different network, so let's say 2 different networks are interconnected, and a message has to be sent by one computer in one network, another computer in another network, there are 2 sets of data link layer modules that have to serve the whole communication. But the scope of your service as a data link layer module is within a single network. As soon as the message is passed to the gateway, they forget about them. It's out of their hands. So when you send out a message, the data link layer on your computer will make a message unit. And that's called what? what's the name of the message unit in the data link layer? Frame, yes. So frame will be created. Okay. So framing is one of the most important function of data link layer module. And that will be passed down to the physical layer. So you have this button box here that represents physical layer. Generate the signal, whether that's electric or fiber, optical signal, send to the receiver, and if the message has to go somewhere outside of the network, the destination will be the gateway. Right? As the data link layer module, it doesn't matter who is the final receiver. The only thing that they care is who is the next receiver within the single network. And within the single network, the gateway router will be the receiver. So they just pass that to router, and router's physical layer receive it, convert that to ones and zeros, which is frame, and that frame will be read by the data link layer module, probably the Ethernet data link layer, inside of the router. And that's the end of the journey as far as data link layer is concerned. Inside of the router, the third layer has to be involved to forward that message down to the next hop, and that will be the responsibility of the second set of data link layer. So the same thing will be repeated every time the message, the frame is passed to the gateway. Gateway will involve layer 3, forward that to the next, and the next hop router will pass it to the next and next until it hits the final destination network where the final router will form the frame, send it down to the physical layer, generate the signal, send to the final network, and the receiver will receive it directly from the router, and ones and zeros will be reformed. Data link layer will forward that to the upper layer, network layer, and that will be the end of the journey. Okay. Data link layer can be divided into two smaller sublayers. One is data link control sublayer. The next one is media access control sublayer. The media access control sublayer is the lower sublayer that meets the physical layer. Data link layer control sublayer is adjacent to the upper layer, the network layer. And some, depending on what kind of infrastructure we are talking about, some don't have media access control sublayer. If that data link layer protocol is for only two devices, it's peer-to-peer connection, right? I'm sorry, point-to-point connection, where you have only two devices, then you are not really sharing a medium with multiple devices. You have to either be the sender or the receiver. But if your device is sharing a single medium with a lot of other devices, then this media access control sublayer specifies how to utilize the unique resource. Data link layer or link layer addressing with MAC address, as you said. And those addresses should be unique within a single network. But you don't really care whether that's unique over multiple networks or not, because you don't pass that MAC address over to a different network. You never do that. But IP is unique across the whole internet. So where do you find IP address in your message? Whose header include IP addresses? What layer? Network layer, IP header include IP addresses, source and destination IP addresses. They never change until it hits the final destination. How about the MAC address? Data link. So every time router receive a frame, the original source and destination MAC address are dropped. Okay? You don't need them anymore. And send it up to the network layer. So there's an IP module handling it, and send it to the other side of your data link layer. That creates a whole new frame with whole new source and destination MAC address. So which one is IP address here? The red letters. And link layer address, the black letter is the MAC address. So L1, L3 is unique for the first part of the journey within a single network. And the next part, you have totally new L4 and L5 address that goes into the frame header. Whereas the IP address, source IP address should be N1, and destination IP address must be N8 throughout the whole journey, regardless of the status or the location of the frame. The source and destination IP address should not be changed. So here, the red N1 and N8 is inside of the data field of frame. So that represents the header part, the IP header part. As the gray boxes represent the frame header. So they change the MAC address every time a router passes the frame from one side to the next, whereas the red N1 and N8 never changes. Okay. Sometimes you can just look at the MAC address and tell, hey, that has special meaning. So this is the typical format of MAC address. So you have hexadecimal numbers. Those are not letters. A is a number. What does A stands represent in hexadecimal? What's the number? What's the decimal number that?
It's 11, right? Here it's
Actually 10, right?
That's right.
11 is because you start from 0.
Yeah.
So when you have hexadecimal number system, imagine that you have 16 fingers. Okay? You can count up to 16, but hey, we don't have Arabic symbol that represent 10 with one digit. So instead of writing 10, you write an A. So A stands for 10, B stands for 11, and when you count from 0, what's the 16th number? 15. And 15 is represented by an F. So A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay? 10, 11, 12, 13, or 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, yes. So 15 in decimal is F. So F is the largest number you can represent with a single digit of hexadecimal number. Just like 9 is the largest number in decimal number system. Right? After 9, you need one more digit, 10, which is 10. So if you have this, FF colon FF colon FF colon FF colon FF colon FF, how many times did I say? In 6 pairs. That's the largest number that you can possibly represent with that whole hexadecimal MAC address format. And that has special meaning. That means everyone, listen to me. If you have a message that has to be broadcasted and everyone on your network must listen, use that one. Why would you do that? Oh, by the way, you may see some address look like this. They use hexadecimal. Count how many digits you have. Some have 1, some have 2, some have 3, some have 4. That's not the typical MAC address format, right? And also, how many pairs? It's not pairs. It has quadruple, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you have way more than 6 kind of bunches of hexadecimal decimal numbers. So don't be confused. Even if you see some colons, that doesn't make them MAC address automatically. These days, IPv6 address used by some companies, large internet companies, use that kind of format that use the colons between 4 numbers, but the 4 number can be shrunk into smaller digits. So only if you see pair of 2 hexadecimal numbers and 6 of them connected by colons, they represent MAC address. So we're going to talk about ARP. And if you remember, in the first class, we talked about different protocols in different layers. And this represents the network layer, where you have big IP. Okay? That's the represent big major player of the network layer, so IP. And then we had 2 small boxes down here, 2 small boxes up there. So you still have 2 small boxes, ICMP, IGMP, that must use IP packet to be delivered. So the whole ICMP, IGMP message will be encapsulated inside of the IP data field, whereas 2 small boxes here don't really need IP. They serve IP. And the other box that we don't see here is ARP. That's just a variation of ARP. We don't use them a lot these days. So ARP serve IP by resolving the IP address they use into MAC address that you must provide to the data link layer protocol so they can be delivered. And ARP is basically a protocol that asks, hey, or shout, who has this IP address? Give me your MAC address. Because my master, my IP module, wants to send something to you. Wait a minute. You need the street address, the MAC address, to deliver any message in a single network, right? If you don't know the MAC address, how can you address your question? So that's where we need all F address for ARP. So ARP shout with all F MAC address that goes to everyone. So listen everyone. You must listen if the destination MAC address is all F. Okay. So if you read it, the question will say, is this IP address yours? If not, then ignore it. If it is your IP address, then you write a response and send that to the source MAC address where the original ARP question came from. So request goes to everyone on the network, broadcast. The response from the holder of the IP address in question will be sent directly to the sender of the question, the requester. And that's what you call unicast message. So a message can be unicast or broadcast or multicast. In this case, the request, ARP request is broadcast address, broadcast message, and ARP reply is a unicast message. And this is the structure of ARP packet. And whether that's request or reply, the structure is the same. So that's the syntax part of ARP. Hardware type, protocol type, hardware length, protocol length, operation. And then you have a bunch of address fields. So the term is a little bit unconventional these days. Hardware actually refers to the infrastructure level protocol, so LAN or WAN protocol in the data link layer. So what's the hardware type for these computers in this classroom?
Ethernet?
Ethernet, yes. So Ethernet is the value that you plug into the hardware type field. And then protocol refers to the upper layer protocol. So what's the upper layer? Okay, so that's why I said ARP is somewhere between layer 2 and layer 3. It's not exactly layer 2, not exactly layer 3, but it's sort of IP. So IP is the upper layer protocol. So IP is the protocol type there. Hardware length mean the size of the lower layer address. So MAC address, how long is it? And then protocol length means how long your IP address is. And then operation can be either 1 or 2. If there's a question, that's a request, value 1, reply, number 2. And then source hardware address means the MAC address of the sender of this message, and protocol address is IP address of the sender. Destination hardware address, of course, is the MAC address of the receiver, which is unknown at this point. When you send a question, hey, who has this IP address? Tell me your MAC address. If I knew the answer, I wouldn't send it, right? So this part is filled with zeros in the ARP request message. So by just looking at this field, if that's filled with zeros, you can say that's a request. Although this operation field will also be filled with number 1. If this reply message, which you have number 2 here, that's coming from the owner of the IP address in question. So in that case, the source is the guy who we are looking for, and destination is the computer that originally sent out the ARP request. So if this happens, if you ask for a MAC address of certain IP address and you received an ARP reply, which field can you find the answer that you're looking for?
The one that was empty, does that come back populated?
This one?
Yeah.
Well, that was the destination when you were sending the ARP message. But when you're receiving from the computer that used the IP address. So that's the source, that became the source.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at which one? MAC. MAC address is the answer that you are looking for. Now you are receiving the reply, so the source is the sender of the owner of that IP address that you broadcasted. And he says, I'm using this MAC address. So that's where you can find the answer in the reply message. And what do you have here? Destination? That's your,
That would be,
your MAC address and your IP address, which were here in your reply, in your request. So when do you use ARP? Probably ARP will be one of the most frequently used service. Web, maybe, but these days, well, whatever you do, ARP is critical component of your network because you need a MAC address every time you need to deliver any frame. Well, why can't you just use the same MAC address you found out once? You can just keep using the same MAC address, right? The assumption is the mapping between MAC address and IP address can change anytime. In today's environment, most computers, most cell phones, most internet device use DHCP service. Has anyone heard about DHCP? How many of you plugged in an IP address when you bought a new cell phone? How about the laptop? Did you provide the IP address? No. But you have to have an IP address, right? Where do you get them?
It's automatically generated for you.
Automatically assigned,
Assigned,
right? So every time your device is connected to network, the very first thing that your device will do is, hey, I need an IP address, give me one, give me one. And if you're lucky, then you get one IP address and use it. What if you turn off your cell phone? Or what if you turn off the computer here and turn back on right away? There's no guarantee that you would use the same IP address because your computer will ask again and the DHCP server will determine what IP address you're going to use. Okay? So even if you find out a MAC address that you're looking for that maps to the IP address that you're going to use, you have to ask it again and again and again every few seconds because the mapping might have been changed. So ARP is called very, very often, and you will see how often you can see an ARP message. So what's the process like? Every time your IP module receives a message that it has to be delivered, that it needs to deliver, it creates an IP packet that encapsulates the upper layer message. It can be your email, it can be your web, or it can be your message, your instant messaging. It's inside of the data field of IP packet, right? Now, it writes the IP addresses, source IP address and destination IP address. It's already known. Both of them are already known. You have to know your own IP address, right? So all your IP module always know your own IP address from your operating system configuration file. And then destination IP address is given by your application. Now, you have to send this down to the lower layer where data link layer module is waiting for, Ethernet. And you take it to the Ethernet and give it to them. They will first say, so where do I deliver this? There's an IP address. Yeah, it seems like there's an IP address, but I don't care. Data link layer module cannot understand IP address. That's different layer, right? So Ethernet module will say, give me a MAC address. That's the only address that I can recognize. The IP say, I'm IP, so IP address is the only address that I can understand. So it's no one's job there. You cannot deliver it. So you call ARP, so usually IP module calls ARP, hey, my dear friend, come over here. I need to find out MAC address that maps to the IP address, go out and find it. So every time IP has something to say to data link layer, call the nice friend, ARP. ARP will go out and find the MAC address, bring it back, give it to IP, then IP will say, hey, Ethernet, I found this ARP MAC address. So here's my IP packet, here's the MAC address, now deliver please. Then the Ethernet will encapsulate the whole IP packet into the frames data field, add the header where you plug in the destination MAC address, and source MAC address should be already known to the Ethernet, your own address, right? Where do you usually have your MAC address? Network card, yes. Most network adapters come with the MAC address, kind of hard-coded on the printed card. So everything is done there. Ethernet could create a whole new frame with source MAC address, destination MAC address, and the whole IP packet in the data field with its own IP address, and then it's transformed to signals. So that's how simple delivery of a single message actually happens. It goes through multiple steps. And my PowerPoint is dead again. And what happened to the first router, your gateway router? Receive the frame. So, come on, go back. when Alice communicates with Bob, it sends something to Bob. Source IP address is Alice's IP address. Destination IP address is Bob's IP address. What's the destination MAC address there? Whose MAC address do you need?
Gateway router.
Gateway router, because Bob is not on the same network. If Bob was on the same network, you need Bob's MAC address, but he's not. So you have to send your frame to the gateway router. So use MAC address of the router. But when the first router receives that, it drops the original MAC addresses, take out, so decapsulate the IP packet, look at the IP, destination IP address, find the right path. It determines that R2 should be the next handler, next intermediary, where the frame should be sent. So router has IP module, and IP pass it down to the data link layer on the other side. But again, it has to call ARP module inside of the router, saying, hey, I need to send this frame to R2, and R2's IP address is this, and I want you to go find out the MAC address of R2 on that port. So the MAC address of R2 will be the second level destination MAC address in the frame between R1 and R2, and pass it. The same thing happens again in the next router. The router 2 do the same thing again, send out an ARP message, find out the MAC address of the actual destination node, which is Bob's computer. And that's where the real MAC address of the final destination will be plugged into the yet new frame, which will be delivered and read by and consumed by the destination. So the data link control, the upper half of data link layer, the function includes framing and flow and error control. Framing refers to the process of encapsulating upper layer message into data field, adding the header, adding the trailer if needed. So you create a frame. And then flow and error control may or may not happen, depending on what infrastructure you have. Some data link layer protocol include strong flow and error control functionality. Ethernet does not provide much. It has some error control, but no flow control. And depending on the protocol, the frame structure can be simple, some are more complicated. This is an example of old not sure what protocol it is, but it says like a bit-oriented protocol. So it's just general representation where you have the beginning part that represent the beginning of the frame, and then you have some header. The actual header, the beginning of the frame starts from the header. This part is more like physical layer warning sign. So to help the receiver catch the frame at the right moment, most of the frames have some preambles. So it's like, if you live in rural area and you don't want to hit deer or something, you put this little whistle in front of your car on your bumper, and that makes little sound. So when you drive, deer or other wild animals can hear something is coming and get out of the road, right? That's how you can avoid unnecessary accident. So these preambles has certain patterns of ones and zeros, but they don't mean anything. Just let the receiver realize, hey, there's a new frame coming, so I have to be ready. My synchronization clock starts here, and metronome starts, and start to interpret the first bit right from the beginning of the header. And then you have a bunch of data, and then trailer part. And then you have another flag that indicates I'm the end of the frame. This is actual structure of PPP, point-to-point protocol. That's the name of a standard protocol. That was widely used in the olden days, but still widely used in some ISP environment, where you have only two devices on each side of the connection or link. So you have only one address field, and even that one is always filled with all ones, because there's no point of writing receiver's address where you have only one receiver. If you are sending something, you are the sender, and the other one is receiver. If you didn't send it, you are the receiver. And there's some control field. So this part is the header, address control protocol. So you have only three fields in the header. You have payload part. FCS is a trailer that includes some bits that enable the receiver to check if there was any error or not in the delivery. You don't have to memorize this structure to just know that different frames have different structure. It's the syntax part of the protocol. Error checking basically use the redundant bits to see if there was any change in the data or header since they were created. Don't worry about the error checking. So this is another part where you have this term block coding comes. So block coding in the physical layer chapters is a digital to digital coding technique to avoid synchronization problem. Here, block coding is used to check the errors. So just understand the term, when the term is used, what it means. The technique is the same. You divide the original message into small blocks of bits and map them and replace them with the same number of blocks but larger bits. That way, when they are received, the receiver can tell whether the received patterns of ones and zeros are normal or something that they should not use. Something like this. Error detection and error correction are different. Error control includes both error detection and correction. But detection is the capability that the receiver can tell whether there was an error or not. If there was an error, it just discards the received frame that includes an error. It may or may not request for retransmission. Error correction is the capability that the receiver can regenerate the correct message from the redundant code. So it does not require retransmission, but the receiver can actually find out there's an error and then find out what the original values were. Cyclic codes is a type of block coding, and one instance of cyclic code is CRC, Cyclic Redundancy Check. That's the technique that Ethernet uses to check that if there was any error in the frame. Checksum is another technique. So it divides the original message into blocks and put them together, stack them, and add the ones and zeros column by column, and do some calculation. And that checksum technique is used by most internet standard protocols. So IP use checksum, TCP use checksum, UDP use checksum. So it's widely used, but not in the data link layer. We just have that slide to compare the different types of error checking techniques. The checksum is one, and block coding is another. Block coding, which includes CLC, is used by Ethernet, but checksum is used by Internet standards. And we'll talk more about checksum in the later chapters. This is what I mean. You stack them up and add ones and zeros column by column this way. And calculate the checksum value, plug that in to the header. So receiver use that number to check if there was any error or not. The same calculation, and if there was no error, the calculated checksum will always be zeros. If there's any non-zero value in any of those columns, then the receiver can tell there was an error, although it cannot pinpoint where that error is. It cannot cover it. It cannot find out which part is the error bits, but you can just drop that whole message because there was an error. Flow control. It's basically how do you make sure that when there's a problem in communicating your messages, how would you make sure that the receiver can tell you there was an error and make you retransmit or something, or slow down? If there's a missing frame, there should be a mechanism for the receiver to tell you, hey, there was a missing frame. How can you address that? You cannot just say, hey, I didn't hear that part. Which part? That part. Which one? Just a little bit, a few minutes ago. Exactly what part are you asking about? So you have to address them again, and you need a complicated mechanism to point out the part where the receiver could not get. Or the receiver should be able to say, hey, you're talking too fast. Can you slow down? How long? Forever or just a few minutes? So that all should be described in the protocol. So some protocols include that functionality, some don't. Usually, that's pretty complicated mechanism to implement. So the lower layer protocols usually do not include that part for fast delivery. Ethernet does not provide much of those functionality, but in the Internet standard protocols, one particular protocol is very, very powerful in terms of controlling the flow, and that's TCP. Okay? So TCP has all kinds of bells and whistles to provide strong flow control and error control. And so ARQ is different techniques that allows the receiver to let the sender retransmit missing part or error parts. And we'll talk about this in details in the transport layer section, not here, because there's no ARQ for Ethernet, no ARQ for ARP, no ARQ for IP, UDP, nothing. Only TCP does. These are all the slides that explain different types of flow control. Okay, now, so far, we are talking about the upper half of data link layer, where you make a frame and control the flow. You need to change that part when you change your transmission speed. When you change your conductor medium, or change the transmission medium from copper to fiber, do you need to change the frame structure? No, you don't have to, right? That's why we still use the 40-some years old Ethernet frame, original Ethernet frame, still used by today's latest Ethernet card. So that logical communication part in the data link layer has never been changed for the last 3-4 decades. The lower half, where it involves what kind of communication medium you share,